Hey, Christina. Great to see you.
Hello. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's twice in 1 week. That's a good week.
It is, right? I see a few familiar faces and names. Hi, Nikki. Hi, Alicia. I'm excited to see you here. Hello.
Okay, we'll go ahead then and begin. I'll do my best to keep an eye on any new people coming into the meeting here. I'm all alone without our student volunteer, so I'll manage the waiting room while we talk. But for the sake of time, we will begin. Welcome again to everyone. Thank you for taking a little bit of time out of your day to join us. Feel free to drop your name and your organization into the chat. I'd love to see who's here and see where you're coming from. So say hello, feel free. If this is your first time joining one of these webinars, this is the third installment of our professional learning series, Recover Appalachia. I am Josh. I am the founder and director of Recover Appalachia. If you're not at all familiar with our organization, I'll do a quick intro. We are a nonprofit based in Portsmouth, Ohio, and we are a training provider on one hand. We provide entrepreneurial mindset and entrepreneurial skill training for returning citizens, individuals who are navigating recovery from substance use disorders or coming back into their community from prison, corrections, rehabilitation. Think of us not like a treatment provider. We're not in that business. We're not even necessarily a workforce agency or business incubator. We like to think of ourselves as a force multiplier for existing clinical services and reentry programs that are out there doing fantastic work. All the work that you find people are doing on a day-to-day basis, we come alongside those organizations and we provide the entrepreneurial mindset training that helps improve outcomes for individuals who are coming out of highly structured environments and doing their best to get back on their feet and succeed in reentry. And we also do a lot of things like this that is focused on education and awareness and ecosystem building. We are a learning organization. So we are here having these conversations with other providers in this space, the people that we serve, the clients on the ground, because we are not only trying to give, but we are also trying to get a better understanding of what the needs of returning citizens are, how we can support better, how we can empower individuals to become everything that they can be, and how we can be a voice within the communities that we serve to really convince funders and legislators and city councilmen and county leadership about the value of the work that you all and we do to support returning citizens. To hopefully show folks that there is social and economic value to supporting this kind of work, and that when communities support their returning citizens, everyone benefits in the end. So that's just kind of a quick blip on Recover Appalachia and who we are, in case this is your first time to one of these events. As I said, this is the third installment of our learning series. In January, our webinar, which this is kind of an ongoing conversation. So I would invite you to go back and watch the recordings of previous sessions if you want. They're on our YouTube channel. But back in January, we made the case originally for how entrepreneurial mindset training can improve outcomes for the clients that you serve. And then last month in February, we had a discussion around reframing entrepreneurship. When a lot of folks hear the word entrepreneurship, they automatically or only think of business development, business creation, business management, which it very much is. But we reframed entrepreneurship to show the value of the type of training that we do for all returning citizens and all folks, regardless of whether they want to start their own business or not. We are in that business of assisting folks who are coming out of treatment or prison and who want to start a business, a side hustle, a micro enterprise, something that can empower them to succeed, especially if they're facing barriers to conventional employment. Yes, we do that, but we recognize that not everybody wants to start a business, or maybe even is in a position to or should. So the training that we offer is also good for workforce readiness, skills that are going to help individuals be better employees, be more employable. And also, it's going to be really life skill development that, again, just helps them navigate life more successfully. So it's an ongoing conversation. We're happy that you want to be a part of it. Go back, listen to the previous webinars, keep us on the schedule for future ones. But today, we're turning our focus to talk about the support system for returning citizens. And here's the problem that I want to focus on to kind of frame this discussion. The reentry ecosystem is often difficult for individuals to navigate. Not just the returning citizens themselves, but even often for providers. And I can't see any of your faces right now, but I hope at least a few of you are kind of shaking your head. Yes, you get where I'm going with this. Quick story to set up the conversation that we're going to have here. About a month or so ago, I was connected with a gentleman who is working in the Marietta, Ohio area. He had a history of working in kind of the social service sector with another organization based in that region, but had kind of transitioned over to work with the Ohio Manufacturers Coalition. And he is responsible within that broader set of duties for managing a reentry program. So they're trying to connect more folks in recovery and reentry with employers in their region, employers in their network. And so we had a good conversation about what he's doing, about what we're doing. And this guy was very eager, very enthusiastic, but his enthusiasm was coupled with what I would call a healthy bewilderment at the size and the scope of the problem that we're all trying to address in different ways. And what really stood out to me from our conversation, because we talked on Zoom and then we met in person about a week later at the GRIT conference in Marietta, Ohio, which I think some of you were at as well. And he was feeling very much out of depth in trying to understand the ecosystem that is available to support returning citizens. He said that day he had somebody, contacting him, asking for help. It wasn't something that he or his organization provides directly, but he wasn't really sure who to connect this person with. And he was feeling a bit overwhelmed himself as a provider trying to navigate the space. So we had a conversation. We talked about maybe the need for peer support, if they could incorporate that within their program to have individuals who kind of walk alongside those that they're trying to serve. It was a good conversation. At the end, he kind of chuckled, he laughed, and he said, "Thanks for walking me off the cliff," because it was that kind of overwhelm that he was experiencing. So committed partner, strong industry connections, but still unsure how to connect people to services that are available. So I thought, you know what, let's have a conversation about this. And who better to have this conversation with, I thought, than Brandi Hawthorne. And I'm going to bring Brandi into the conversation now. And most of what we do here today within this hour or so that I have you is going to be a conversation rather than a presentation. Brandi is the subject matter expert of Fair Chance Populations with Future Plans Ohio. She's here with us on the call. She's also a Recover Appalachia board member. Brandi, would you like to introduce yourself? Tell us about you. Tell us about your work. Tell us about your history.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to be here. And as Josh shared, I am professionally employed with Future Plans. I've been here 3 years. And prior to that, I worked at Pike Community Action, focused on workforce development under all of the funding provided, not only from the federal level, but also the state level, to help those impacted by the opioid epidemic, substance use disorder, and reentry. I have served on several coalitions and boards over the last 7 years. I am currently the president of the Southeastern Ohio Re-entry Coalition. I am serving on the steering committee for the state level Stepping Up Ohio initiative, which is focused on helping our court systems build out different pieces and parts of what can be provided for those who are returning home. A little bit more about me. I'm very dedicated to this space. I do not have lived experience with contact with the justice system. However, I did start with having contact with the justice system when I was 15, when my own father was incarcerated. Started at the county level. And then by the time I was entering my senior year of high school, he was returning home from Noble Correctional Institution. And so from a very young age, I have firsthand experience of what it's like to have a loved one attempting to re-enter. And I like to say that that part of my life has led me to where I'm at, and has helped me really identify that this is not a they, them problem. This is a we problem. And we all have to come together to make the difference.
Beautiful. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Brandi. So a lot there, right? Let's start though with a question. And for those of you who are listening, we're going to have a conversation here, but if we could, I'd like to base it somewhat on your engagement. I'm going to launch a poll right now, and I'm asking you this question. If you would take a look at the poll and give us an answer here. What is the biggest challenge that you are facing in your work right now when it comes to navigating the reentry ecosystem? I'm going to fall silent for a moment, let you look at those options. Choose the best. It might be more than one, right? Which one stands out most to you? If none of these do, if it's a different one, please drop your answer in the chat. We want to hear from you about what you're experiencing as we get into this. So clients falling through the cracks between services, standing out so far. That's our winner. Yep, pulling ahead, 4 out of 9 so far. No others yet. I guess I nailed some of the top challenges for this poll. That's encouraging. Okay, I'll give 10 more seconds here if you haven't had a chance to complete that poll. So Brandi, it looks like we've got 44% saying that the biggest challenge they're facing is clients who fall through the cracks between services. Pulling up second, we have gaps in support after key transition points. So right when someone comes out of treatment, right when someone comes out of prison, or maybe when they've just completed a program, at those points of exit or reentry, gaps in support in those spaces. So those are our top two answers. The rest of our responses are pretty evenly distributed between unclear roles between organizations, difficulty coordinating with partners, and not knowing what resources exist or when to refer clients. All right, I'm looking in the chat here. Elisha says, I don't know if I selected the right one, but I feel like part of that falling through the cracks is not having connection or follow up. Okay. So what stands out to you, Brandi, from those responses? Not having connection or follow up and falling through the cracks. Is that something that you see a lot, whether now in your work with future plans, anytime in the past?
Absolutely. I think when we look at um, the support that is needed, we have to begin, number one, with acceptance as providers and community members that this is navigating reentry, whether it is from incarceration or recovery. And when I speak to recovery, I speak to substance use disorder and or mental health. I think far too often
Yeah.
we forget those pieces. And so what could happen is when someone is returning home or returning to a new home, um, there is a lot of mindset shifts that have to occur. And what happens is, at times, is the individual themselves have such a difficulty in embracing this new chance at life. And that's where I've appreciated the entrepreneurial mindset because it really helps someone identify how they can shift. And in my work, with workforce development, helping individuals who are starting down this path of coming home, starting to look at gaining employment, what then can be easily identified as a sense of purpose. And so what happens is that an individual who even makes that far in the connection, right? They've uh, met at their Ohio Means Jobs office. They've had the opportunity to maybe work with opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities. They've worked with us at Future Plans through the GRIP project, or one of our other adult projects, or Work Ohio Southeast. Is that they start to get services, and part of the reason they may fall through the cracks is that they can self-sabotage. We can self-sabotage, even those of us who have maintained, success. It comes back to our own mental health and overall well-being. And so one of the things that we focus on here at Future Plans, and I'm very adamant about in my community experiences, is that you have to really look at the whole picture. So it is not just an individual needing help with workforce. It's not just an individual needing help with housing. It's not just an individual trying to get their children back. This is an individual who wants to work on their overall well-being, the whole picture. And as early on in these conversations that we can bring mental health to the table, in some shape or form. It doesn't have to be that if you're speaking with an individual who's about to head home from the county level jail, that you're speaking to them, that they, and sharing with them that they absolutely need to go obtain mental health services. It could be as simple as, okay, in the county that you're returning home to, these are the local peer support meetings that are held. These are this is your local reentry coalition. This other opportunity for you could potentially be utilizing online uh resources. So helping them, if they have substance use disorder history, navigate the links for virtual meetings, whether that's, Narcotics Anonymous, Alcoholics Anonymous, or some of the other groups that are out there that help lessen the isolation. And I think that's where people start to really fall through the cracks, is they start to feel alone. And so it's easier to shut down and not accept that you deserve the chances that you're hearing about, that you're starting to embrace. Um, Whereas if you have a support system that does not have to be us as the professionals, right? We help them locate these support systems. They're more likely to succeed and continue to engage. Now, we will always have people, no matter where they're at in life, fall through the cracks. And part of that is acceptance on our side. Now we have made vast improvement with the numbers, looking even here in the state of Ohio with recidivism rates and how many people, here in Ohio, we have 30% of the population that does have another contact with the justice system after being released to home. But really think about that other, the other percent of people who aren't. And most likely, if we were to look at those situations and talk to them, you're going to hear success stories of support outside of the human service agencies that they work with. So we always encourage, even with workforce planning, and that's something with Future Plans that we've really worked on braiding, is behavioral health and workforce support. Um, Even for those of us who work in this field, it's draining, right? We can get burned out.
Yeah.
We can have days that it's just too much. And do we have people to call? These are the same conversations that we want to have with someone who's returning, so they feel that support. And in those dark moments, they don't allow themselves to fall backwards or give up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What are the challenges, Brandi, that you see when providers themselves aren't fully aware of what the ecosystem is like in their county, in their region, or doesn't make the deliberate effort to be a good team player, so to speak? right? I mean, I think you probably have seen that, programs that kind of exist in isolation or operate in silos, um, not well connected to others, not knowing when to refer. How does that impact individuals who are trying to make sense of where to go, when to go, and how to succeed?
So it's a huge impact for all of us. So I'm gonna answer this question in two parts. So within agencies, we are all focused on what we need to do.
Mhm.
And that is not only providing what is in the root of our purpose of helping others, but we also have the demands. If you're in treatment, you have case notes, you have medical billing. If you're in workforce or case management, you have case notes, you have systems that you have to work in. And so what can happen is that we get very focused in what we're doing that we forget to think outside the box. And one of the things that I've identified in working with a lot of the different coalitions I've had the privilege to be a part of is the opportunity for our local communities to just really assess the community itself. And that can be through implementing a social service council. It can be similar to, the work we're doing with Recover Appalachia, where we bring different people together. The re-entry coalitions that start to invite others to the table. And that's the biggest piece. And I was given this advice a few years ago when I was president of the Pike County Prevention and Recovery Coalition. It was previously Prevention, Recovery, and Reentry. And so one of the things that I learned is if you feel siloed and you feel like the projects that you're working on, there should be other people with you, have you invited them? Have you really looked at the problem itself that you're trying to conquer? And have you looked at the agencies in your area to say, I think I should reach out. Maybe we could work on this together. And sometimes in different areas, you will have um, the obstacles of, well, I'm concerned this is duplicating work. I'm concerned that they're going after the same grants we are. And that's why it's so important when you start to have these conversations is to openly put out there, when as we start to plan and we really look at the strategic process of the social problem of reentry in our community, let's leave our egos at the door.
Mhm.
And don't be afraid to reach out to someone. The worst that's going to happen is that they tell you no.
Mhm.
And then the other side is for, those individuals who maybe start at one social service agency to get help. They aren't aware of other ones, is that we continue to advocate. Some of the biggest advancements that I've seen in the last 7 years is the utilization of social media. Um, and that is as simple as some of our Ohio Means jobs offices are phenomenal with posting open positions. How often, as professionals, are we encouraging, these individuals utilize social media, create a LinkedIn account? You do not have to, post or, put even your details out there. Maybe you want to create an account just for your own exploration of, recovery, reentry groups on platforms like Facebook. Maybe you want to follow different individuals, on TikTok, or different channels on YouTube. There are so many different support systems that can help just link, and you just have to think differently. And so for someone who's, returning home, and let's say, for example, that I visit my local Ohio Means Jobs office and I share, I'm also trying to look for housing, and they share, oh, I'm not aware of any resources. That's the mind shift change that we want to support for those individuals. That first, I don't know of a resource doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. And so as a collective community, it's advocating for these resources, getting them out there and sharing them. And that, again, that all starts back with that conversation of, what are the needs in our community? Who are currently addressing them? What could we do better? And bringing the stakeholders together. And really trying to identify um, better ways to get the word out. And I think sometimes that can come back to, you know, if you know of a local NA or AA meeting that's being held, find out who the facilitators are. Reach out to them and say, "Hey, I have some resources. Can I drop off these brochures on this upcoming job fair? Can I drop off these brochures for local mental health support?" And just really letting, we as the leaders in the industry, we have to really take charge of getting that information out there. I think that sometimes those who, return home in a community that is not as progressive as others are, and we face stigma, we have to continue to share the success stories.
Mhm.
So if if I'm coming home and I'm feeling discouraged. I visited the local High Means Job Center. I was able to apply for a job, but I'm not sure what I'm going to do about housing because where I'm currently staying, I've got a very short, a short-term stint, but I'm allowed to be there. You know, is there someone out there that can share with me how they did it
Mhm.
and what options they had? And I think that's another big part of when we look at advocating for justice with this social problem is the success stories. They are out there and we have to continue to share them um if we're going to even just break it's the silos.
Right.
Somebody shares, I visited Ohio Means Jobs, and then they immediately sent me over to social services. And then I was able to work with this programming who helped me with my workforce. I also had support from my outpatient treatment provider. For me as a returning citizen, I would be like, oh wow, like all of those pieces exist. Well,
Mhm.
I wouldn't know that if I didn't get to hear that person's success story.
Yeah. Yeah, as you're talking, Brandi, I know those. I really like how you're framing that for providers in terms of like their basic mindset and how we approach this, because those moments when people come to us for help can be really learning moments for us as well. I'm thinking of a guy who was referred to us a few weeks ago. Somebody sent him over to us. He came asking about a certain thing that we don't really do or have. But it gave me an opportunity to say, well, what do you need exactly? Hear his story. And I was like, let me make some calls. And I made some
Yep.
calls, three or four different partners, made new connections, and was able to refer him, in directions that were more helpful to him at that moment. Right. So it was an
Mhm.
opportunity for me as a provider to learn, how exactly do I fit within the ecosystem? Here's what this person needs. I'm glad somebody referred them to us, even though they didn't seem to know exactly what we were doing. They sent
Yeah.
them to us, right? But it was an opportunity, right? So I have a better grasp now of our local system here just because somebody came to me and I didn't know at the moment,
Yeah.
right? And I had to go find it out. So what I hear you saying a lot is that the coalition work is indispensable if we're really
Mhm.
going to serve people well and achieve the best outcomes. But what comes to mind for me in that, and I'd like to hear your thoughts on, is I recently heard a guy kind of talking around the same issue, but he said the problem is nobody's being paid to do that work.
Mm.
Nobody's being paid to go out and build the coalition or understand the ecosystem and maintain the connections between the partners, right? That's nobody's direct job description or role that they get to get paid a lot of time to do. Is that a challenge? How do we
Oh,
overcome that?
that is absolutely a challenge. And again, I've done a lot of volunteer work. When I started, 7 years in this field, um, I openly share it's not a field that I thought I would work in. I wanted to work with the youth. And so jumping in, and I had to start from the ground up and really doing exactly what you just shared as far as I have a problem in front of me. How could I try to fix it? And when it comes to then okay, if we want to try to fix that, who then fixes it? And you start to branch out, and it's like, okay, well, there's no funding to fix that issue. And one of the things that I can share that I've had the privilege of in my role at Pike Community Action, as well as here at Future Plans, is the from a professional stance, the supervisors that I've had the privilege of working with agreed that my participation in these coalitions was needed, and it was easily identifiable. I was easily able to identify it back to the job duties and the responsibilities that I held within the different positions. And so at times, what we have found best is whether you're, again, as there's a social service meeting that's held here in Pike County once a month. It's held, during the day. Our coalition meeting is held during the day. Several different boards that I've been a part of, their meetings are in the evenings. And so, yes, those I am attending, in my own time. And it's something that I'm passionate about. But if somebody were to say to me, well, I need, you know, to be compensated, it may be that we have to find a different niche for them because another great lesson that I've learned is the work that we do day to day to provide the income that we need is work. A lot of times the volunteer that work that we do is because of the passion and the purpose that we have within ourselves. And I've been a part of coalitions where we have worked to get grant funding. There are always newer programs and grant opportunities, even just from the state of Ohio. So, for example, when I started several years ago, there was not a lot of opportunity for grants to fund post-overdose response teams. And I was a part of one. And a lot of what we executed was on volunteer time, but we were able to talk to a lot of our partners and especially treatment programs, and we said, okay, this is a need, right? We need to be responding, per Governor DeWine, we're supposed to respond to an overdose in our county under this coalition within 72 hours. We can't, the team we were building out with, 4 to 5 individuals, we couldn't tackle that. So we went to the treatment providers and said, okay, this is what we're trying to do. And you start those conversation with the decision maker. So the directors, the CEOs, and you're able to then, is this something that, your team could help us with, and set a schedule, during, and it's usually during the workday. And they're able to tie it in to the work that they're already providing. I always encourage everyone, if you are looking for grants, make sure you're tied into the right connections. For example, the Stepping Up Ohio initiative, the newsletter monthly gives the link to grants that are being funded in different areas, whether it's housing, workforce, educational programming. And if you are not locating the grants that you need, is there a local grant writer that you maybe could reach out to and just ask, hey, this is something we're trying to work on. We want to get to that place, and they may have some resources for you and potentially could help you write the grant, and they would just include their fee within the grant process. And so I think, there are always going to be roadblocks in the human services field. We see that currently, as policies change and there are shifts with the supports that we're able to provide, it comes down to, this is the problem. What can I do with it? And then how? And like I said, bringing the different stakeholders. So maybe you don't have the funding, right, to operate a post overdose response team, but then you learn that a local treatment provider has been provided with some funding that could support that. It's all about conversations. It's all about getting out there and networking. And again, really identifying the people that have the same passion as you do, because when you bring all of them together, the issue with the funding is a lot easier to tackle when you do it as a team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Those are good thoughts. Um, you said something earlier within the conversation about, what happens when providers aren't better connected. They don't understand the ecosystem. A phrase that I hear often, duplication of service. Mm-hmm. I'm interested maybe in some more of your thoughts on that. One thing that stood out to me when I was at the GRIT conference in Marietta a few weeks ago, when your CEO, Denise Reading, spoke in the opening, I wouldn't say that she dismissed the idea of duplication of services, but she definitely framed it, and I thought was what was a very helpful way. That she was saying, you hear people talk about duplication of services, and yes, I get it. We don't want to be doing something that somebody down the street is doing. We're just not aware of it, especially if they're doing it
Right.
well. It would be better if we collaborate, right?
Mhm.
But she kind of framed it in a way of like, there's plenty of work to go around, and nobody is doing
Yes.
one thing so well that nobody else could not, contribute to that in some form or fashion as well. So I think there's like two sides of it, right? And
Mhm.
I've seen a lot of times small organizations get maybe excluded from funding opportunities because there's a larger organization already doing something. And so this new initiative kind of gets absorbed into the existing organization that already has more capacity, already has more resources that that small organization may need. And that can sometimes delay or disrupt innovation within
Mhm.
service. Maybe there are young startups or nonprofits that might have a new angle on an existing service and really be able to do it better, but they're not being able to access those resources because, oh, we're afraid of duplicating services. So it's just a couple of ways of looking at it. And I'm curious to hear more of your thoughts on that. How often does it really happen that services get duplicated and that's a net negative impact for the people we're trying to serve?
So I think, it's exactly as you shared in reference to the niece's opening. Uh, why at times do we look at it as duplication of services instead of continuation of services? So, if and why are we not looking at, okay, if you want to provide this service and we're providing this service, how can we team up? And I think that that's been another exciting part for me being a part of future plans is it's about what we do is capacity building and talking with other organizations and joining together on
Mm-hmm.
grant applications and saying, okay, yes, you provide this service, we provide a similar service, but how can we mold those together? And I actually have a really great example of this, and that is so there's a new initiative in the state of Ohio and at the GRIT conference, the Lieutenant Governor, Jim Tressel, was able to speak to this, and it's workohio.gov. And the Work Ohio program um, has come to fruition as we are trying to better support individuals in addition to local Ohio Means Job Centers, in addition to opportunities for Ohioans with disabilities. In addition to what we provide, through future plans, and so what is happening is, here in the Southeast area, we're working very local, very connected with the local area workforce board, and Future Plans is providing, assessing and coaching for individuals, and then we are then immediately handing them over in the process for Discover, Prepare, and Place with Ohio Means Jobs. So are we two entities that can provide similar services? Yes. However, we're not duplicating anything because we identified what we can do, what they can do, and how we can blend them together. And so at times I think that's where it really takes looking at the problem, the social problem, regardless of what it is, and saying, okay, who could do these pieces and parts? Who could provide those pieces and parts? I've been a part of duplication of service conversations for years. One of the things that I advocated for very early on in my career is the addition of peer support to workforce development. And I had treatment providers who would say, well, we're already providing them peer support. And I'm like, yeah, that's great. Are your peer support individuals trained in workforce? And they're like, the feedback was consistent. Well, no, they're trained through the state of Ohio for peer support. And it's like, yeah, absolutely. It's a great program. I've carried my certification. Um, However, they don't have those extra tools. And we were uncovering this as we would have clients who would gain peer support jobs and then would be immediately contacting us saying, I need to help this person locate housing. I need to help this person with all these different pieces and parts. And that's why I'm saying it's a continuation. It comes back full circle. A lot of times the duplication of services brought up more often than not when we talk about funding, right? That is where the biggest piece is. In the community and the efforts that we do, most of the time, commissioners, the city mayor, they're not particularly concerned if I'm doing the similar work to what you're doing. But
Mhm.
if you have funding to do it and I have funding to do it, that's where there's a flag raised of concern.
Right.
So really thinking through who can I team up with on this? Asking them for a support letter. Sometimes it's not even that you need them to continue in your process. You're just trying to advocate to your funders, that this is not a duplication. You get a support letter from a partner who is similar, who advocates for you too, and says, yes, we provide these services. However, what they are applying for would add this, and then this is how we will work together
Mhm.
as we move forward.
Yeah, and have those support letters ready to go. 'Cause sometimes you
Yes,
get like you'll get a your request. Oh, this is going in tomorrow. Can you provide a support letter? Right. So have a template or have
yes,
your AI tool that you use, on hand to create that really quick. Right.
yes. And always send them to them and ask them to fill it out. That's always a
Hmm.
really good best practice instead of asking them to create their own.
Hmm. Right. Right. Absolutely.
Yep.
You want to make things
Ease
as
of access.
easy as possible for partners. Always. There's
Yep.
a couple of comments in the chat here. I want to direct your attention toward Brandi. First, Christina was asking about the conference, the recent grit
Oh,
conference. So maybe you can take a moment just to talk about that annual event. And then we've got a
yes.
comment there from Elisha as well, that we can address too.
Okay. So, for those of you newer to the Grit Project and understanding who we are and what we do in Appalachia, we are under the Future Plans umbrella, and the Grit Project is growing rural independence together. It actually started in Workforce Area 1 with this very specific, 4 counties, and then has grown to cover all of Appalachia. So every year, we convene together for a conference where we bring everyone to the table. So anywhere from education providers, K through 12, because the GRIT project also supports career assessment planning within high schools. We support a lot of the STEM and STEAM collaboratives for, the K through 12 arena. We support summer boot camps for seniors without a plan. We have our adult programs that focus on, building career paths, not just obtaining employment. And so at this conference, you have the opportunity, again, it's held every year in February, to attend. And what we have found most beneficial is, down here in Southern Ohio, you may meet a provider who's up in Ashtabula that has found a way to get creative with maybe their WIOA funding or a grant they received from the state. Or you hear how they were able to bring different collaborators together to fix an area of issue in their community, such as transportation. And so that's the Grit Conference. It's and I'm going to drop my email here at the end. And if you have any questions, if you want to learn more about the project itself, please let me know. We do a lot of breakout rooms. This year, we were able, again, we had the presentation by Lieutenant Governor on the Work Ohio program. Josh and I were able to sit on a panel of presenters on reentry. We also held a reentry simulation. I think that's another option that we could bring to more communities. And what that is where individuals actually participate in an activity of what it would be like for them if they were returning home from incarceration. And so there's lots of different pieces and parts at the Grit Conference. Please reach out to me. I'd love to get you the information so you can see what we provide every
Yeah.
year.
The reentry simulation I really enjoyed, Brandi. And I got to say, by week 4 in that simulation, I was ready to commit a crime
Yeah,
because it really helps you get a sense of the frustration,
yeah,
the setbacks that returning citizens face that most folks don't even think of, right? It's so easy to just glibly say, well, just get a job or just do this or just do that. But when you're coming out of treatment or incarceration, especially if it's been years long, I mean, I've heard people talk about coming out of incarceration. like pre smartphone, and then they come back into their communities and everybody's on a smartphone on Facebook and social media, and they had no idea what it was, no idea how to navigate it, no idea how to use the tools, the digital tools that were now like in vogue, that were just normal to most folks. So those are the kind of things, I think a lot of us miss when considering what are the challenges that they face and how can we help meet people where they are to overcome those challenges, right?
And I think with that, the additional piece there is again, it's not a they them, it's a we problem.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm standing in line at Kroger behind someone and they, they look like me, they're dressed, just another,
Mm-hmm.
citizen here in Pike County, I may not know the pressure that they're feeling inside, the anxiety, because they did just come home from any amount of time in incarceration, county level, state level, and just going to the store is overwhelming for them. And I think sometimes we forget those small pieces. And it's the same as for anyone who has, survived trauma. There are a lot of similarities, and we forget about that. It is not as simple as go get a job. It is not as simple as, well, you just need to go find a house or just go get your driver's license back. I'm going to go wait in a BMV line of 12 people, and then they close and say they're going to lunch, and then I don't have a way back there until tomorrow. There's all these different pieces of parts. Or I'm coming home and my spouse has had our children while I've been incarcerated. So they're ready, here you go. Now it's your turn to go work and go do these things. Well, now there's the mental load, right? Of, okay, how do I make this happen? And there's so many pieces of parts. And I really think the reentry simulation is amazing. There are actually online reentry simulations. And so to Josh's point, I did not get to participate in the one at the Grit conference, but I did one online. And within 3 days, I had been already in the hospital. I hadn't eaten, and I was broke. So
Right.
it was very interesting.
Yeah. So what you say there, I think, is a good lead into the third part of our discussion here. But I do want to maybe as a segue to it, highlight Alicia's comment. She just kind of talked about here something she's been trying really hard to do is let stakeholders know that it's okay if their resource agency service is not a good fit for an individual. But the key is don't just close the door, but recognize and redirect. I feel like sometimes it just takes one negative encounter to cause a setback. So that's a really important thread that I think keeps coming up in the conversation here. If somebody comes to us like that person was sent to me a few weeks ago, if I was just to say, no, we don't do that, sorry, good luck, right? Closing the door in Alicia's terms there, that could be enough of a setback in a person's mind, depending on what stresses they're under, like you're talking about there, Brandi, that could really negatively impact them and lead to something, that we don't want to see happen, right?
Oh,
So
yes.
when we talk then about, we're talking about services on one hand, availability in the ecosystem, and then we're talking about maybe the gap that you've already alluded to a few times in terms of personal capacity, right? So this gets at the gap we're trying to fill through Recover Appalachia, is recognizing that when individuals are coming out of a highly structured environment that has in many cases been life-saving, it's helped them in many ways, but life is not like that. Life is full of complexity. It's unstructured. It's hard to navigate. It's confusing. It's full of setbacks. There's not always somebody being responsible to look over your shoulder and give you reminders and help you get to places. It requires a lot of self-direction. And that can be difficult, especially then when you have all those barriers placed upon you that the reentry simulator was so good at showing.
Yep.
Not just the normal life difficulties, but now, yeah, I don't have an ID, but I can't get assistance without an ID. And I don't only have so much cash and I don't have support. How do I get here and how do I get there? So what we're trying to fill is that gap for folks, to teach and empower with cognitive skill and mindset development that enables them to more successfully meet those type of challenges in their reentry. I'm curious. So, Brandi, you've done tons of work, personally, professionally. You've been a powerhouse board member for us at Recover Appalachia. I'm curious, maybe to hear more of your thoughts on how you see the role of this type of cognitive skill and mindset development fitting into the overall picture of the reentry support ecosystem?
So when I think about the reentry population, and again, it can be treatment and it can be incarceration. It can even be somebody who's been in a horrible relationship, right? And is coming out, just trying to breathe, is that we have to continue to advocate as early as possible, um, for mental health support, for holistic care across all of our agencies. So, whether you are here because you work in the justice system, I know Alicia's with us and she's over at Gallia County Jail. I'm here and I'm from workforce. If we at the very beginning are advocating as early as possible for someone to really think about their mental health and accepting that they deserve the chance that they've been provided with. Josh, you said it best that a lot of times incarceration saves individuals' lives. Someone very close to me did several years incarcerated, and they openly share that that saved their lives. And then I hear the other side of the things that they went through while incarcerated, or the little things that they do, from as simple as, not letting things touch the floor, because of that and institutional mindset. And so we just have to really focus on what can we do as early in the process to support the mind shift. And what I've seen is far too often part of the issue with the mind shift is judging others around us. And so I've had clients say to me, "Well, you don't understand where I'm coming from because you have it together." I'll never forget that conversation because my immediate response was, I don't. I'm taking it one day at a time.
Mhm.
I am working towards, believing that I deserve the pieces and parts of my life. And so I think at times that the mind shift is, eliminating judgment, accepting where you're at in the process. And then, what does it take for you to make that shift and who can support you? And then for us as being the partners and the agencies, like just advocating those few things with someone, right? Okay, yes, you were incarcerated. You had committed a crime, you were disciplined, or you're currently being disciplined. That's who you are, that's what you did. Once you are released, that doesn't define you. The same as with someone who has had a substance use disorder or struggled with mental health. I was someone for a very long time that did not want to identify that I had mental health struggles. Whereas now I will openly share the things that I have gone through because if my story helps one person, then it's worth it. And that's what we have to really try to help individuals understand is the belief in themselves, like just as early as we possibly can. The state of Ohio, from a state level with Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, are making vast improvements on what this looks like while incarcerated. So they have brought peer support training within the institutions. The individuals can gain their certification when they return home. But while they're inside, not only do they gain this education, but there's then a peer support within the institution for others. So that is bringing mental health to the table very early on in that process. I'm a very big advocate for the impact that we can have on one another from a peer-to-peer stance, whether you're a trained peer recovery supporter or not. Your influence with your story or the success of another person's story, or even the failures can help someone else. And I think that's part of the mind shift we have to make as a society. And again, it comes back to it's not a they them problem. This is a we problem.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So we're coming to the end of our hour here, and I want to make sure we leave a few minutes here at the end to share a few resources. What's standing out to me I'm interested to hear from you who are listening to this conversation too, of what you're saying, Brandi. A few threads have stood out to me. One, the coalition work is indispensable. We may not be getting paid to do it directly, but we need to make deliberate efforts to reach out, to connect, to be continually learning, to understand the ecosystem ourselves so that we can help those we're serving navigate it better. I hear you saying mental health support has to be built in holistic care as early in the process as possible to improve outcomes for our returning citizens. Connected with that, I'm hearing you say peer support within, especially within workforce development, is an indispensable need for positive outcomes. And maybe through it all is this sense of solidarity, right? The they, them, moving away from that mentality, away from that understanding to a we kind of structure of how we approach this whole work. The rest of you, if you have anything else that stood out from this conversation with Brandi, drop it in the chat. I'm going to ask you to do one more quick poll as we close here, and then we're going to share a few resources with you on the way out. Has this conversation helped you in any way to better understand the ecosystem, or has it been affirming of some of the challenges that you have faced? If things still feel unclear, what has surfaced for you in this conversation that you could still use help with, better understanding, better to navigate yourself as a provider? Drop that in the chat. Like I said, Recover Appalachia, we're a learning organization. We're hosting this as kind of an ongoing conversation, both to give and to get a better understanding of how we can all work together to improve outcomes for the people that we're serving. So I'm seeing much clearer. I'm seeing somewhat clearer. Fantastic. Feel free to be honest with me if it's still unclear, because we are here to learn and we are here to serve. We've got 3 minutes left. Brandi, there's 3 resources on the screen here that I want to share with them before we end. The first 2 are yours. If you would, go ahead and talk about
Absolutely.
those. Yeah.
So again, I briefly touched on this with Work Ohio. The initiative is to try to stop some of these gaps in services when it comes to workforce and referring people out for other referrals in the community. So like I shared in Southeastern Ohio, what we are doing is we're helping them take the career assessment, coached, and then we're working with Ohio Means Jobs. How can we connect them not only for educational resources, but that local support in the community? And I shared that link. And then again, with being with the Southeast Ohio Re-entry Coalition, we are revamping. Jeanette Langford was with us for years, and she's absolutely phenomenal. And since then, we started to restructure. We want to invite anyone to the table who's interested. We serve Jackson, Pike, Scioto, Adams, Lawrence, and Brown counties. We are going to start a reset with some strategic planning. And again, and what that looks like for us is very similar to what I've shared. We're going to look at, it's basically like a 5-step process. What is the problem? How many individuals do we have returning to these counties? What are the current resources? What resources do we need? What would be duplication or wouldn't be duplication? And then what can we create as an action plan to work together?
Fantastic. The last thing you see on the screen there is an upcoming community event we're hosting in Portsmouth, Ohio, called Together We Rise. This is a community forum. We're hosting this in coordination with National Second Chance Month, the month of April. I've shared a flyer in the chat along with a link to our YouTube channel where you can view a short promotional video for the event. But this is going to be a very unique gathering. It's going to include networking for local organizations to host resource tables. There's going to be recovery themed music. There's going to be free food. We're going to have some individuals sharing their story. The storytelling, lived experience aspect is going to kind of permeate the whole thing. We're also going to have kind of an interactive storytelling booth where individuals will be invited to share their story and be part of a project that's kind of going to put together like a video montage of people answering the question of why they believe in second chances. So the registration link is right there. It's free and open to the public, but if you'd like to host a table, all the info is there as well. We'd love to have you. That's going to be on April 21st from 5:30 to 8 at the 17th Street Community in Portsmouth, Ohio. And that is it. And it is 1 o'clock on the dot. Brandi, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you all for taking an hour out of your day to be with us. This recording will be up on our YouTube channel along with past webinars as well. And we'll look forward to seeing you hopefully at the next one in April. Other than that, all right, everybody, have a great day.
Thanks,
See
Josh.
you next
Thanks,
time.
everyone.